This video is best viewed in full screen mode, and on YouTube that's this icon right here. And if you have a high bandwidth connection, you also want to watch it in HD, which is this icon right here. This video is to go over the state interest rate information. Click under the Windows menu. You can select the state interest rates. Okay, the program uses the information in this form to know what interest rate to charge for a particular state, how long an original judgment is good for, and how long renewed judgments are good for. It's basically where you enter in all the rules for a state. And what I would do is start out by showing you an example of a simple state like Arizona. Arizona is a relatively simple state. It just has a fixed rate of 10% and it hasn't changed in a very long time. So on this interest rate grid, you just have to put in the one entry of 10%. Over here is where you put in your check marks on whether or not there's interest charged on your prejudgment interest, whether there's interest charged on your court costs, and whether there's interest charged on your attorney's fees. And over here is the judgment expiration rules. How long does it take for the original judgment to expire, and how long does it take for renewed judgments to expire? One other thing too about these check marks here, they directly correspond to the check marks here on your judgment. So whatever you set these to, whenever you create a new judgment for Arizona, these check marks here are the same as these here. Okay, the next state I want to go over here is Texas. Texas is a little bit more complicated than Arizona in the fact that they have rates that change from time to time. The way it works in Texas is that when a judgment is created, it has a fixed interest rate that does not change. But the interest rate depends upon the date that it was created. For example here, if there was a judgment that was granted between 9/1 of 1983 and 7/1 of 1984, that rate would be 10% non-compounded. Then Texas changed the law in 9/1 of 99. So if you were to get a judgment on that date and before this date, your interest rate would be 10% compounded. And they currently, up to date, have a compound interest rate. And so what you have to do is just enter into this grid all of the dates and all of the rates, and whether or not it's compounded and whether or not it's variable rate. So there is an example of how you would enter interest rates in for a place that has rules like Texas does. Okay, and the next state I want to show you is Michigan. Okay, Michigan probably has one of the most complicated interest rates around, but it's really not too bad. They just have an interest rate that is variable. That means when you get a judgment awarded, the rate changes on that judgment every 6 months. And they also charge compound interest. And if you notice, this here is checked for the first time, and what that means is that any judgment awarded during this time is affected by the future entries into this grid, which is a fancy way of saying that it's a variable rate. Now, one thing we have down here is where you can put in your websites for this particular state. And that way you can go in there and you can look up and see the rates. For example, we click here, and that brings up the website for Michigan that tells us what the interest rates are. And all the information from here was just entered into that grid. Now, if you notice that it changes every 6 months. So on July 1st, an entry was made into this table, the 2.101, which corresponds to this interest rate here. Now on January 1st of 2010, there'll be a new interest rate, and you'll have to put that into the program. Now, in order to help you remember to do that, the program has a method, and that is what these two option buttons here are about. This here state has a rate that varies and it needs updating from time to time. In Arizona, you don't ever have to update it. In Michigan, you do. So what you do is just click on this option here and put in the next date that you need to update this grid. And so what will happen is when this date occurs, you will get notified by the system that it's time to put an entry into the grid, and you just click on this here, go to the website, type it in, and then boom, you're done for another 6 months. Now you know how to maintain your interest rate information. The system comes preloaded with interest rate information on almost every state. However, a little disclaimer here, although every effort has been made to make sure this information is as accurate as possible, ultimately it's up to you to make sure that the information in here is accurate for the judgments that you have.